Okay, Harry, so in response to the GOP's shameful treatment of Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson during her Supreme Court nomination and, I should say, confirmation, you recently wrote, and I quote, "Like the souls in Dante's Purgatory, she can still be joyous," to borrow Booker's trope, knowing her confirmation remains assured, and on terms that count as bipartisan in this debased period. But the near total
that's a little pointy-headed now that I hear it, don't you think?
Yeah, it is,
Quoting
right?
Dante, a little pretentious, don't you think?
You think? But the near total opposition to a patently qualified candidate for spurious reasons is one more stain on the Republicans' conduct of the Supreme Court politics. In your opinion, why is the GOP going down this road and positioning themselves as racist obstructionists? Is it merely performative for the base as they have become the 24/7 culture war party? Or is there something deeper and more dirty?
Okay, so that is a big one. Let me first try to clean up my pointy-headed mess and just say I didn't mean to just name drop, but in Dante's book, the souls in purgatory are happy because they know even though they're bored and doing all this stuff, they know they're getting to heaven. That's all. So that was that's the notion and why I thought it was opposite. All right, what are they doing? Well, one thing I think it's clear they're not doing is any kind of honest assessment of the merits of the next Supreme Court justice, about which they don't even care that much because it's a straight up swap from Breyer to her. Won't change the composition of the court, probably won't even change the voting pattern. So they made a calculated decision to use it for different reasons, even though it meant slapping her around, looking like thugs, and risking the real resentment, I think, of a lot of people, and certainly people of color, in order for what my assessment is, just to get a few kind of red meat slogans for the midterms, to be able to say, not Jackson, she's going to be on, but to be able to say, oh, Democrats, they are into critical race theory, though no one on their side has any idea what that means. They coddle child pornographers, a completely spurious, that would be the right word, charge as to her, and other really remote or just irrelevant points that have it as far as her qualifications go. Now, last week on Talking Feds, Al Franken was on, and he felt that the Dems missed an opportunity because he saw this basic strategy, and what the Dems seemed to do in response was just preserve their razor thin margin, get her there, and it looks like so far so good. But what they didn't do is fight a sort of similar political battle by pointing out all that had happened, starting with Merrick Garland, to absolutely stack the court in a conservative hammerlock that I think really is out of step with the legal profession and with most Americans. So I'd be glad. We could talk about this for a long time, but the short answer to your question is, I think, why did they do it? Because that's their base, and they're looking up to the midterms in a very kind of demagogic, 3-word slogan. Michael Bennett did my podcast yesterday. He said the problem with Democratic messaging is you always need the other bumper sticker, continued on other bumper sticker. So in the same way, the Republicans did this good bumper sticker kind of stuff. Dems, critical race theory. Dems, love child pornographers, and that's what they were going for, and not her, which makes it, really a crude and nasty exercise as it pertains to her in particular, and the kind of way she got slapped around even though the charges were meritless.
Look, I believe that race is playing a big part into this. And nobody said when Trump, and I actually applauded Trump, despite the fact that everybody thinks I'm this anti-Trump guy 24/7. Not true. When Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed, and Trump said he was going to, if he had the chance, to put another woman on, and or when he decided to put Amy Coney Barrett onto the bench, I was like, you know what? Good. The bench should be not this homogenous group of old white men, right? It should be a mix, just like the same way that the United States of America is. And what bothers me the most is when, I start hearing people turn around and say, well, how could she be on the Supreme Court if you can't even pronounce her name? And they used to say the same dumb shit when Kamala was running. It's like, well, is it Kamala? Is it Kamala? Is it Carmela? What, how can you have a vice president whose name you can't pronounce? Well, if you can't pronounce somebody's name or you pronounce it wrong, first of all, nobody cares. Second of all, that's on you, right? Just ask or listen to the news once or twice, and you should be able to understand how to pronounce her name. But what bothers me the most about all of this is her credentials are impeccable. There's no one, I don't give a shit what Republican turns out. She is more accomplished than virtually anybody that's even, come for that seat. And so far, the only Republican that's willing to stand up and state that 100% that she intends to support Ketanji Brown Jackson is Maine Senator Susan Collins. And I say, good for her, because it's a really tight vote. And one of the things I was watching on CNN, they have John Avalon was doing this great piece on Reality Check about the fact that, past nominees, and how far as a country we've digressed in the fact that past nominees have basically sailed through this confirmation process, almost to the point where there was not a single nay vote. So, for example, like Justice Anthony Kennedy and Antonin Scalia, both of them was unanimous. And then I think it was Ruth Bader Ginsburg. There was like 3 naysayers, right? Onto that voted nay to that. As opposed to now, everything is so partisan. How about for the first time, if we're going to allow the Supreme Court to continue to do what it needs to do, and to allow the president, who is, responsible for picking and choosing who he wants to put on the bench, how about just go along with them? I mean, could you imagine that somebody like, Amy Coney Barrett is confirmed, and yet you can't get Ketanji Brown Jackson confirmed, right? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. Allow the president of the United States to pick and choose if, in fact, that person has the ability to appoint somebody. Just allow them to go through the process without looking like a bunch of racist fucking scumbags. I don't know a nicer way to put it.
Yeah. Boy, it is a deeply broken process. So let me say a few things. First, about the role of race. I agree with you in this sense that they are, when I say they're going for the midterms, they are playing to their base. And I just think there is no way around the kind of, even if it's not raw racism, the racial insecurity of so many of the Trump stalwarts who believe that the elites are sort of taking things away from them and giving preferences, especially to racial minorities. But on her credentials, it's more than just her race and gender. I clerked for Thurgood Marshall. He was the last person with significant defense experience. He brought a lot to the court. I mean, half the amendments in the Bill of Rights are about the government's relationship to criminals. That's something we're really supposed to get right. And someone who knows how things work, what it's like, has represented and accused, that matters a lot. She's done that. She also, by the way, has been on the Sentencing Commission, and that's an important part of their docket now, especially after Breyer goes. And she's been a district court judge for 10 years, and you really get a feel there. So it's not her diversity of experience is, just going to be really helpful to them. So that, that's the second main point. But in terms of deferring to the president, it used to be like that. Something went there. Half of what, in fact, the Republicans are saying today. There's 2 or 3 like Cruz who are making shit up about either her record or how liberal she is, and then there are others who are making just no sense at all, saying, well, I disagree with her judicial philosophy. You have no idea what her judicial philosophy is.
And by the way, it's no problem. Let them disagree, right? That and claim that she's soft on crime, or that they didn't like her, Trump era immigration ruling when she was on the bench. Let them. You're not supposed to agree. Could you imagine if you agreed with every single thing that a member of the Supreme Court believes in? You would have unanimous decisions each and every time. There would be no dissent. In essence, I hate to say it, but as a people, as Americans, our country would never be able to grow if everybody agreed with everything all the time.
All right, but let me interrupt, because as a pointy head, I've already established my pointy-headed bona fides, and judicial philosophy does matter, but the whole process is designed to hide it and obscure it, and she played the rules of the game. So now the other, and then the last point I was trying to make is half of the objections expressly, I mean, it's such an insult to her, have nothing at all to do with her, but are really trying to, expressly settle perceived scores of how people thought they weren't treated right. It is the case before about Scalia, there just wasn't this kind of ideological loading of every nomination, and just, presidents picked the most qualified, and there was an early period where there were a lot of fights, but then for the most part, people went through. But here's another thing, since around the civil rights era, it has become the case that almost every really important and polarizing dispute gets settled by the court, or we look to it to do it. And that's one of the things that raise the stakes. That doesn't mean, of course, that they should be doing bogus investigations. They should be doing real investigations. Anyway, this was a really tawdry performance, and especially Hawley and Cruz and Blackburn, made fools of themselves, and it was kind of shameful because they weren't, it wasn't really about her, and that's a disservice to the court and to their constitutional role.
Right, but let's not forget as well that the Democrats sort of put like Brett Kavanaugh through the fucking ringer, but here's the difference.
For reasons,
that's the point, for reasons. And I'm not saying it again because I'm left of center, right? And so I'm saying it because a classmate of his came out and made all sorts of sexual allegation claims against him. Now, I think that's kind of relevant versus, I don't like Ketanji Brown Jackson because she's soft on crime. Right? I mean, soft on crime in what respect? I mean, look, everybody's entitled to have differences, but I think the Republicans went way too far here. And you're right, like Marsha Blackburn, who I've known for many years, used to come to my office. I never, ever in my life would have turned around and said that I would think that she's just a fucking racist, but she is. Now, Ted Cruz, nobody knows what Ted Cruz is.
All the others are running for president, though. Do you think she's running for president, Michael? Because I couldn't. Well, where did this come out? Why'd she go? So crazy Trumpista.
Probably just to continue to be part of the boys' club that she was never in. As much as she wanted certain positions by Trump, and she was an early Trump supporter, he never gave her an opportunity to join into his administration, and she wanted it terribly. So why she continues to placate this level of stupidity that's all being promoted by Donald, honestly, I don't have the answer to it. But let me just move on for a sec here, Harry.
Sure.
Because last week, the January 6th committee seemed to truly advance the ball on several fronts. First, of course, there was Judge Carter's decision in the Eastman ruling that laid out how Trump more than likely committed felony obstruction. Now, then there was the discovery of these missing call logs. I mean, 7.5 hours worth. And then, of course, tax attack on Ginni Thomas and, a host of other smaller revelations. And it seemed that the worm, right, has turned. Right? I mean, what's your larger feeling here? What do you think's going to ultimately happen? Because so far, we've seen Donald as Teflon.
Yeah. So it's a great question. Like we do this podcast every week and you look for broader themes and you look to, put in titles. And that was what I was thinking about all weekend. Is this a change in the tides? It feels like in a few different ways, maybe there's a bit of a reversal of tide here. Now we got to start. We have to sort of take one step at a time. I do think they had a good week. They're starting hearings, they say, in the spring, but it ought to be pretty soon. That gap is just stinks to high heaven, and it's, if in a prosecutor's hands, it's really strong evidence of intent. You could get what the prosecutors call a consciousness of guilt instruction. It's you probably have insight into this. I have a little bit from being at the edges of the White House sometimes.
Well, once you finish answering my question, Harry. Yeah, once you finish answering my question, I will answer yours.
All right. So I think we're seeing the best committee ever, and they're going to do a great report. The Department of Justice has, as Garland promised on the 5th, started an investigation now of the political actors, very big, and also the slate, the bogus slates, all very big. But if you're asking my, best instinct of what that means for the ultimate $64,000 question of prosecution of your former boss, I don't think we've come that far yet. There's still lots of obstacles that we could talk about more. But generally, the feel that things have turned a little, and the department itself is at least, got the wherewithal and the focus on a lot of people around him, and that the committee is really making progress. I agree with you. I felt like, the arc of justice is long, but bends toward, or, the arc of the moral universe, et cetera. So yeah, it felt like to me, not just a good week, but a kind of maybe a sort of reversal of tide, and certain important things are going in a better direction.
Okay, so let me just break this down for a second. Let's just start with Judge Carter's determination in the Eastman ruling that Trump more than likely committed felony obstruction. That's a crime, correct?
That's, in fact, it's not just a crime. It is, and I've said this for a while, the most likely charge for him, 1512 D4. He aids and abets, which is the same thing. You're treated as a perpetrator under the law. The obstruction, and what's that mean? He was really trying, and he took steps to do it, to keep the vote from happening. To me, it's a lay down that he was trying, and there's just these exotic questions about intent, if he's such a sociopath that he really believed it, etc. But I've said this before. I for one, I think intent is simpler than people are saying it is, but I think the evidence of intent is long since there. I think the Department of Justice understands it's long since there, and the obstacles now, they have to keep working it, move up the line. I'd love to see Scavino cooperate and tell just what Trump was doing, but basically, that's what he was trying to do, and he had guilty intent. I think it's there, and it's all the other constitutional, small c, big C, policy, political things that I think are going to, be weighed in Merrick Garland's balance. But yeah, Carter, he didn't say exactly that he committed a crime, because it was, as you say, more likely than not. But the part that's missing, the extra dollop of intent evidence, I think it's there already. And by the way, if it wasn't, 7.5 hours of no call log, that's very strong extra intent evidence for sure.
That's right. And yet Merrick Garland still sits on his hands. And now couple that in, as you just said, he is sitting on his hands. Look, Harry, you could tell me whatever you want. They've had more than 500 people provide testimony to this committee. Yeah. Okay, 750 now. That's supposedly, marvelous. Yeah. Okay, so if each one is in for no less than 8 hours. I've never been in one of these, and I've been in more than a dozen of these hearings. I've never been in one that's less than 8 hours. You're talking about 5,600 hours. You're basically talking about almost a year and a half worth of ongoing 24/7 testimony. And if you don't, by God, have, after a year and a half of having every second of every minute of every hour of every day for a year and a half, if you don't have enough on the guy and so on, now you have to understand why these sycophantic Republicans continue to side with him, calling it witch hunt, calling this the greatest injustice against Donald Trump in the history of America. And it's about time that Merrick, Garland starts to do something. But then, as you just rightfully said,
to do something.
Yeah.
He started.
An indictment is the right way to go. But let's now take what you just pointed out. 7 hours and 37 minutes of pure absence on a call log by the President of the United States. Now compare and contrast that to Richard Nixon and his missing call log, which was for what, an hour? What was the time period?
The gap was 18 and a half minutes that was erased in this ridiculous supposed Rosemary Woods. Yeah. But the gap in the sort of smoking gun tape was 18 and a half minutes. That's about, not 5% maybe.
It's something like that. But what makes this even more nefarious on behalf of Donald is that the bulk of this 3 hours and 37-minute absence in the call log occurred while the attack on the Capitol was ensuing. And that's very dangerous. And rest assured that Trump was on a cell phone, most probably somebody else's, the way he would speak to me. I testified before Congress. I gave it to the DA, to the attorney, anyone that asked me, including Republicans. When you spoke to Donald, did you always speak to him from the White House phone? No. Hope Hicks at some time would give him the phone. Scavino would give it. Other people said, let's say he was playing golf, and he would just have them call me on their cell phone. So this is crazy shit. All right.
Well, it's not that. I'm playing golf. He's doing, he's lazy and sloppy. This isn't that. This is purposeful. Dan, give me a burner phone like a drug dealer and throw it away. And of course, we know he's working the phones during that time. And we know that at least one call came in through the White House that doesn't appear on the log. So this is up front. I mean, this really is screaming consciousness of guilt. He decides in advance, I'm going to take crazy measures, drug dealer type measures to keep a record being made. That's the act of a guilty man.
And then the cherry on the cake is, there was recently this individual, this gentleman who testified before the House, committee, the January 6th committee, stating that he was the one that went out and purchased 3 burner phones from CVS at the request of Amy and Kylie Kramer. And they were on the phone with, supposedly in his mind, he believes it was Mark Meadows, because they were close enough he could hear the conversation, who of course was with Donald at the time. So who knows whether Meadows was using a burner phone that was provided by these two ladies that had this gentleman purchase them and, took the receipts. And he was like, well, I don't have the receipt. He made me give it to him. I said, what are you worrying about? They have all of this at central office. They'll just contact them and say on what day, at what time.
Yeah, they have it in Russia because it was being eavesdropped. But I want to say, as a prosecutor, this is the main reason. There are a couple people. Look, 750 people, and they're getting so much, and there are other ways of getting much evidence. A couple exceptions here, it seems to me, are A, Meadows, and B, Scavino, who is at his shoulder, the trust, he's a caddy who he's now made into deputy chief of staff. He trusts him. That guy's testimony would be very valuable. And the contempt, holding him in contempt means they're not going to get it. But what I think the Department of Justice ought to be doing, I think Scavino has basically decided he can do a year for Donald. But I would love to see them build a case against him, obviously, if it's consistent with the facts and the law, but where the leverage is much more than a year, is more like 15, 20, and really then, because that's testimony that I don't see how we're going to get otherwise. And it's also devastating testimony. He is the guy who is at his shoulder. And we start with, here's everything Donald was trying to hide, and he can go through it. That's a really important missing piece right now.
You know, it's very funny too. I agree with you. I think that Dan is stupid enough to want to go to jail for Donald, despite the fact, I'll give you a little history. I'll give you a little history. It could be longer than a year, but he's willing to do something like that in hopes that Donald will save him, like he did with Manafort or Stone or others. Dan, you're right, started out as a caddy, but he ultimately became the general manager of the Trump National Golf Club in Briarcliff Manor, that's in Westchester. And he was ultimately fired by Alan Weisselberg with Donald's approval, because nothing gets done without Donald's approval, because he shit up all the books. And he was on the outs for several years.
Is new. Yeah.
Yeah.
What did he do?
For several years, he was on the outs, completely on the outs. And then
but
one
what
day
did
he
he do
shows
to
up,
the books?
no, it wasn't that he fucked them up. There was always losing money, and that he couldn't keep. And despite the fact the place was very crowded, it was never making the money, and so on. So they ultimately fired him, claiming he's a very social guy. All the members liked him, but when it came to numbers and the books and so on, everything was completely screwed up. And then he had other people that were working for him that were equally as incompetent. Nevertheless, 3 years or so later, he shows up to my office and he says, "Would you take me in to see the boss?" I said, "Sure, for what?" So he goes, "Well, as we're going through this campaign now," he goes, "I really like to do his social media." So I say, "Dan, I'll do whatever you want." I happen to have liked Dan. I said, "But when did you get into social media?" He goes, "Well, during the time after, I was, when I left here and I really couldn't find a job, that's what I did." So now all of a sudden, he's somebody of import. And this is never that was there. And generally, once Trump throws you out, you never come back. I mean, there's maybe a couple of people, 3 or 4, that I can name off the top of my head that have managed to somehow come back. And they come back because, like with Dan, it was so cheap to have him on that Donald wasn't raising any money at that time. He was making the allegations he was doing this from his own pocket, which he ultimately took back every penny, just another Trump lie. He took Dan on. And, you got to turn around and give the guy his props. He's willing to probably go. I mean, he lost his wife and his kids. I don't think they talked to him, at this point.
You mean divorce?
Divorced. But, at the end of the day, I got to give him props. He's managed to climb up Donald's backside so far that he's tickling his tonsils, with the top of his head. It's just a complete joke. But anyway, just moving on then here, Harry. Because
all right, but I just want to say, January 6th, this joke is the guy who's at Trump's shoulder. And, if he could talk, that'd be some. Let me make a general point. It's bad there hasn't been accountability. It's bad that people have skated away, but it's terrible. It's an outrage that we don't have even the full story of what the hell happened. And a guy like Scavina's got an important piece to fill. And, it would be a shame if they just
Who do you blame for that, Harry? Who do you blame for that? That they've managed to escape?
Well, first and foremost, Trump, but his helpers. Once upon a time, that included you. I mean, his incredible willingness to his disregard for the law and willingness to sort of do everything. But now look, we've got to talk about Mueller report, and a lot of things coalesced. And time and again, I, like other Trump critics, you were maybe too smart for this, thought, oh, now he's going down. And, it didn't happen. But you start with him, but there's a whole series of actors. Mitch McConnell, he's done his role. A lot of reasons why we don't have the full story. And, the committee, first and foremost, is doing that. And they're a really good committee. I'm impressed with them. I think probably the strongest ever. And, good for the country that they're on.
Yeah, you know who I blame? I blame Merrick Garland. Let me tell you who else I blame. I blame District
You blame
Attorney
Merrick Garland that we don't know everything that happened?
I'm sorry. Allow me to continue here.
Yeah.
All right. I blame Merrick Garland. I blame DA Alvin Bragg. I blame the Southern District of New York prosecutors who sat with 12 sealed indictments a year ago and then decided to let him off the hook because there wasn't enough to convict him on. Yet they came after me like a bunch of wild fucking animals. All right. Alvin Bragg, I know what he has in those boxes. First of all, he just returned one of my boxes to me. And so on. Any one of those set of documents, the documentary evidence, just like what we were just talking about, is more than enough to have brought an indictment. And the same thing holds true, with Merrick Garland. There is enough already. At some point in time, there's something that I like to call Trump fatigue syndrome. Right? It doesn't really exist. I kind of made it up, but it's Trump fatigue syndrome. Yeah. I think we're all fucking tired of hearing this guy's name in terms of, like you just said it, that everybody's expecting the anvil to fall, right? And land right on Donald's head, and that's going to be the end of it. He's done. He's finished. Oh my God, look what information just came out. Holy shit, how could he survive this? And yet the Teflon Don keeps surviving it. Week after week, month after month, now year after year. And none of these people are doing anything because I think that, I don't think that they understand, like Alvin Bragg, I think he's got his job all messed up. His job is not to convict, no different than the prosecutors at the Southern District or even Merrick Garland. Your job is to turn around and to see whether or not that there's evidence of the commission of a crime and then turn it over to others, like a jury of 12, in order to determine innocent or guilt, not to ensure convictions so you can move on to a 7-figure firm with like the Paul Weisses, the Hastings, right? You can move on to Lowenstein Sandler or Davis Polk or, Guggenheim Partners, like all the prosecutors in my case did. They're as bad as Donald because they don't care about what goes on as long as their own personal record doesn't get injured and they get to advance their own careers.
All right, so I'm just going to jump in with a couple points because here I'll have a different point of view just to offer for listeners. So first, look, the thing I was saying is is even more important than the anvil falling and criminal accountability, and that is way important. And it's an ongoing toxin that it hasn't happened, not just for him, but his circle is knowing everything, and all. There is important role for prosecutors to play here, but it's not basically to give the full account. It's to bring charges. And so what we haven't had is the equivalent of a 9/11 commission or a Kennedy commission or just revelation. And that's been large part because of the cynical manipulation of the law. That's the first. And then second, we can talk a lot more about Merrick Garland. I'm happy to, but one thing to tell you is he is not 100% not motivated to get the corner office. And this is going to be his last stop. He is, and his integrity and patriotism really are just superb. I've worked with them, so there could be a lot of reasons why he's going more gingerly than you like, but I do want to put those 2 points in.
And I will allow them to come in. They have been now introduced as evidence, and we will mark them as Exhibit 0. All right. So Harry, yesterday you tweeted that one of my favorite people we talk about here on this show, Marjorie Taylor Greene, filed a lawsuit in Georgia alleging, this is great, that the lawsuit seeking to disqualify her under the 14th Amendment from future service for having engaged in the insurrection is an unconstitutional infringement of her First Amendment rights. Now, if you would, unpack for me what this all means and what's happening in this case, and what's her likelihood of success?
I don't think she's got strong success of her claim. Let me take a step back, because it feels weird to people and they think, oh, that can't really be. But guess what? It really can. In the wake of the Civil War, they passed the 14th Amendment, which is the most powerful engine of rights probably in the Constitution. And they were really focused on the former rebels, and they didn't want them to, and they were going around the former rebels in the South and just giving freedmen hell and trying to keep people from voting. So there's a provision that just says you are not qualified to serve in Congress if you swore an oath to the Constitution and engaged in an insurrection. And they used it early on, and then they said, all right, enough, let's have, and they voted a general amnesty. But that provision is still in the Constitution. It was used in World War I. And it's the important thing to understand, it's a qualification. So you got to be 25. You got to be, this is to be a member of Congress. You got to have lived in your district 7 years or whatever. And you're just not qualified if you previously swore an oath and then engaged in insurrection. So two more quick legal points. How's that executed? Somebody, the exact same way it's executed if a voter says, you know what, she hasn't really lived here for 7 years. It's only been 5, even though, and here are the utility bills or whatever. That it's the exact same thing. And then second, what does it mean to engage in insurrection? At least in North Carolina, where Madison Cawthorn is facing this suit, it just means to have helped these guys out, basically. So when you put it all together and stack each piece on top, it looks really damn serious. Now, on the other hand, courts getting like, geez, that feels like Civil War stuff. But what's happening in individual states, and it's going to happen more, and it's going to have to go fast, because this is an important point, as a kind of contrast to what I was just saying. They can't diddle around, because you got to be on the ballot or not. So people brought this thing and saying, lawsuit, get Green off because she engaged in insurrection. Now, what has she said? Well, when I said all these things about, her crazy ass things, and she's, her greatest hits of statements is probably up there with, the biggest Looney Tunes of all. I was exercising First Amendment rights, but that's such a weak claim. You can use words to foment insurrection, and the First Amendment doesn't protect that. So there's this constitutional provision. So she's going to lose on that, I think. Nevertheless, I just think judges are going to be like, really? I can just bounce somebody from the ballot if I find this, and even though it feels like pretty solid legally, it's just something that I think is going to make judges chafe. So it's hard to give a bottom line prediction, except to say, look, it sure fits the crime. She sure did engage in, help out insurrectionists, one, and two, there are people there who are going to be fighting to keep her and Cawthorn, and there'll probably be a few others off. So it's super interesting. As a lawyer, as a law student, I would say the claim is solid, but as a sort of older, kind of more pragmatic person, it feels to me like, wow, it's hard to imagine they'll really be kicked out, and again, this is disqualified. That means they can't even be on the ballot. But anyway, that's the basic law and where it stands. And I can say that her lawsuit, should not. The First Amendment claim here is really weak.
What's funny though is that her filing, right, actually claimed, and she vigorously denied, right, that she aided and engaged in the insurrection to obstruct the peaceful transfer of presidential power, despite the fact that there's video of her. It's not as if it's video of me saying that she said it, right? This is her going out there and basically stating the exact opposite. But here's the thing, whether it's Madison Cawthorn, who's just another fucking jerk off, or Marjorie Taylor Greene, or Josh Hawley, or Matt Gaetz, or Ted Cruz, or any of the lunch bunch, right? It doesn't make it. Here's what they learned from Donald. When it suits you, lie. And if you have to lie a second time, which you're going to have to, do it. And then keep perpetuating that lie until ultimately that you raise enough doubt. Now you bring up the rock solid point, which is, what's a judge going to do here? Is a judge really going to turn around and not allow, somebody who is a citizen of the United States, who happens to be a member of Congress, not to run again because, there's, this 14th Amendment that prevents them from running in the event that there's an alleged, because nobody has yet to make a determination that the insurrection was actually an insurrection. According to Donald, everyone was peaceful. They were all walking in between the stanchions. It was no different than a regular visiting day. And so now you have all of this, as we like to call it, this, this, it's like a potpourri of bullshit that's swarming all around.
That's how you like to call it there? The potpourri of bullshit? You're going to put it on a badge? Yeah. And I want to make two quick legal points, though, if you'll let me on this. Okay, so first, you're right, but the Trump playbook has been delay, deny, obstruct. It's harder here because come May 19th, say in North Carolina, the name is on the ballot or it's off the ballot. So they can't diddle around forever. And then second, at least in North Carolina, Michael, and check this out, Madison Cawthorn has the burden of proof because of the preliminary showing that folks have made. And, and so it's the exact opposite of situations where we were just talking about it. Carter versus beyond a reasonable doubt. This isn't not just that. He actually has to show he wasn't engaged in insurrection. I'm not sure what Georgia law is for Marjorie Taylor Greene, but if they play it straight according to what the law says, it's, he's looking at trouble. And interestingly, this shouldn't matter in the law, but I get the strong impression that the sort of Republican establishment, including in Congress, would be more than happy to sacrifice him and see him go. So,
yeah, maybe yes, maybe no. I'm not sure about that, but I do think that their preference, despite what many would turn around and say publicly, is to keep them there because their shenanigans really does help them to raise money, which that's all that it seems that they care about these days. It's all
that's the other point about the confirmation, by the way. They not only wanted to get the slogans, they wanted to use it, and they already have to raise money, and they just sacrificed Jackson for that. Yeah. Sorry.
Yes, they're just using her. Okay, so Harry, let's just move on, right? So it's recently been revealed. Exactly. 1, 2, 3. So it's recently been revealed that Ginni Thomas and Trump enjoyed visiting with one another at the White House, and that she would bring a list of people for Trump to hire and to fire. Now, White House officials called her disturbed, and that she would play into Trump's love of conspiracy and overall paranoia, right? The drama of Donald. What do you know, or what have you heard about their relationship and how it's relevant to the January 6th investigation?
All right. So, it is. So let's stay with Ginni Thomas for a minute. It is so bad on so many levels. Remember, John Kelly eventually, a chief of staff is there to screen out the loonies or screen out anyone. You need to have process in the White House. Instead, Ginni Thomas, who is a kind of crazy conservative married to Supreme Court Justice, waltzes in, flatters the president, has these lists of crazy people. These are like the biggest conspiracy theorists, and not coincidentally incompetence. And she takes other solid, nut wings of their own, but calls them never Trumpers. And she would leave, and at least, the accounts that's now been reported, the staff would be like, oh God, she's just because here now Trump is gonna, make personnel decisions. You were there. It's so critical to how a government runs. So to have somebody, even if they were solid, be able to just waltz in, prevent all process, and give their names and flatter the president, and then decisions are made in that way, that's disaster for starters. But who did it seed in the executive branch? Really the craziest of the crazies. And whom did it oust? crazy liberals, as she put it, like Karl Rove and the like. So the actual behavior is really troubling in about 6 different ways. What does it mean for January 6th? Well, she's also, an all-round kibitzer, and even though there are some people who roll their eyes, she had some real power, and she's, we know that she's a conduit between Meadows and Jared Kushner, that there are, and what we know is really based on just the happenstance revelation of fewer than 30 Meadows emails, but we have reason to think she was talking to literally dozens and dozens of members of Congress, trying to buck them up to do what? Ignore the law, ignore the Constitution, and try to what she called, by the way, she's completely in on the big lie. She calls the election with no reason the greatest heist in history, and she's also sort of malicious.
Not for no reason. Not to interrupt you, but not for no reason. She's much smarter than Donald. All right. So is your dog, if you even have one. All right.
Of course I have a dog. Orion, come here.
He's as dumb as a stump. And what she realized is 2 things, and it's important. Then I want you to continue. The first thing she realized is that the last person in Donald's ear owns his head, no matter who it is, whether it's Ginni Thompson or it's the Mike Lindell, the My Pillow guy. It makes no difference who you are, right? If you have the last word in Donald's ear, you own the space in between those 2 ears in his head. And that's all you have to, especially if you're playing to something that he believes, as you called it, the Trump paranoia, right? But more important than that.
Okay, and that's all true. And we already knew she was extreme conservative. Then we found out with the Meadows emails, she's a complete, believer in the big lie. And then we found out after, she's not just that, she's a total malicious, hater. She envisions Biden and being laid out on barges in Guantanamo, and she's sort of dripping venom. And if a person like that, crazy, factually crazy, if you buy into the big lie, and maybe you think she doesn't even, but she has reasons for it, that could be even worse, but just so hating, is making personnel decisions by bypassing all the processes for him. That's really bad. And this, of course, is just personnel. Now we don't really know. They're going to invite her voluntarily. She has no basis to refuse, but we'll see how she fights coming and cooperating with the committee. Now, from there, you add in at least a reason for her influence is being married to a Supreme Court justice, and now the Supreme Court looks terrible. Then you add, I've been saying this for a while, the big problem with Ginni Thomas is Ginni Thomas. You can construct scenarios that mean that, in individual kinds of cases, Thomas should recuse. He won't, because there's this scandal that the law doesn't apply to them. But the big problem really is if it's true. We don't know if it's true, but these guys from the start have always portrayed themselves as best friends and soulmates. If in any way, the senior justice of the Supreme Court believes or holds to this worldview, and again, that's not proven, but that to me is the much more worrisome scenario. And people are jumping to recusal. I can see why they want to, but that I think is a smaller part of what's really going on here, and B, probably not going to happen just because of the messed up way the law works.
Harry, let me enlighten you for a quick sec, because
please do. That's why I come on this show. It's fun, but I want to enlighten. Yes, you've got all the experience.
As a lawyer, you're concentrating on the law and the process and so on. I would ask you, why do you think that Trump allowed Ginni Thomas free access into the Oval Office? And it's not about the flattery. It's not about the fact that she agreed with these crazy conspiracy theories of the election being stolen and so on and so forth. Why do you think that he let her into it? You have to understand the sociopathy of Donald Trump. And I'm not going to ask you to try to guess it, but I'm going to tell it to you.
I think I know where you're going. And if that's true, it's even worse. But
and why don't you tell me? Tell me, please.
School me. Well, I thought you were going to say because she's, has this special role as the spouse of a Supreme Court justice whose vote might really matter for his personal interest down the line. And if that's right,
correct. And let's not forget that there was the entire tax issue that was brought on by Cyrus Vance that had preceded much of what Ginni Thomas was up to. So his feeling in his mind is, okay, she's on my side because I hear what she's saying, and she's promoting the theft of my presidency, and on and on and on, and involved in this January 6th rally turned insurrection, etc. But more importantly, what he cares about more than anything is his money and his business. And if she would have sway because she'll come home and tell her husband, oh yeah, I was sitting with Donald today in the Oval Office, we were talking about X, Y, and Z, because they are soulmates, and his husband and wife, they probably share everything on the pillow or in the kitchen, one of the two. And next he thinks in his crazy mind that Clarence Thomas would have the ability to communicate the fact that this isn't right, that they should not allow his tax returns to be released. And, obviously we know where that went. And that's how Donald Trump thinks. He's not thinking about the process, what's right, what's wrong, should they be allowed to, should they not be allowed to? It's only about what he wants, and he's willing, and she was completely willing, just like Attorney General Bill Barr was willing, to throw themselves into the dumpster fire, right, of Dante's Inferno, for the whole purpose of what? Of appeasing a sociopath, a narcissistic sociopath.
By the way, gorgeously done. Don't think didn't notice how you brought it back around to Dante toward the end of this thing. But let me just, if that's right, look, we've seen Trump like that and worse, and the nation's hope then has to rest in Justice Thomas's, integrity. There are some justices, there certainly are justices whose spouses would know not to communicate, and others who would know to ignore it if they did. What you've laid out is an absolute, nightmare scenario of justice perverted. We don't know. We don't have enough proof of that, but that something like that, the notion that they could kind of be birds of a feather in these views is the ultimate worry as it pertains to Clarence, not as opposed to the recusal stuff. Again, we don't know it yet, but there's plenty. I'll just repeat, the big problem with Ginni Thomas is Ginni Thomas.
So then let me ask you this.
Yeah.
You retweeted the great and a friend of mine, Asha Rangappa, yesterday, who wrote, and I'm going to quote, "The gap in the call records began at 11:17 a.m. The Capitol was breached at approximately 1:30 p.m. This isn't a case of realizing that something crazy is happening and then deciding to hide communications while taking advantage of it at the moment. It means that it was premeditated. If you would, unpack for my listeners, what do you think Asha means here, and how does this prove that this was a premeditated act? How would you prove it as a lawyer?"
I would start there, that it happened before, because it's not as if the all of a sudden there's fighting going on and he says, I better steer clear of this for a while I figure out what's going on. And remember, he's for hours does nothing, and then when he comes out, it's with this really bizarre, we love you, go home kind of tweet. But it started at 11:17. Why does he want to go dark at 11:17? Because he envisions in the immediate future, he's going to be doing stuff that is out of bounds. He doesn't want people to know about. So that means, I think, that his thought, hope, expectation is that there would be, if necessary, it doesn't need to be that he knows it's going to be violent, but there's going to be actual interference, obstruction with Congress's vote. He's going to be in some way fanning the flames or wanting to encourage, at least get reports, and that he goes dark in advance makes him look almost like, if not an impresario of the whole event, at least someone who's got the playbook in advance, and it's a playbook of patent, not just unconstitutional action, but the worst assault on the hallmark of democracy, the peaceful transfer of power that we've had maybe ever, but at least since the Civil War. And then finally, Asha says, Asha knows, so I retweeted. I don't do a lot of retweeting just because, I agree with stuff, but who the hell am I to retweet? People can read it, but except when it's just dead on. And I wish I'd said that myself. If she's an agent and I'm working with her on the case and she says, look, 11:17, 2 hours before it even happens, I would say, oh, of course, great point. I'm going to make sure that's part of my presentation in my case in chief.
Yeah, who else wrote something that I found to be spot on, and I want to get your take on it. Dennis Aftergut wrote in the Slate that, and I'm going to quote it from, using alternate means of communication over 5 or 6 hours. In fact, it was 7 hours, 37 minutes, including others' phones or potentially burner phones to avoid calls being logged, would justify a consciousness of guilt instruction. You agree with that?
100%. He's acting like a drug dealer, and I can show you cases where court after court has said that justifies consciousness of guilt. And by the way, Dennis Aftergut, who I worked with many years ago, is a great American who all of a sudden, I don't know if you publishes something like every day, sometimes with Lawrence Tribe, sometimes with different people. He's really making a move to be an important public intellectual, and I really love following him.
Yeah, I follow him too. And Lawrence is just great. He's been on this show several times. Every time I get off, with him, as I do with you, my head spins. I need to, go grab a couple of Advil because I'm really concerned. I'm really concerned about democracy. I really believe that, Trump is the wannabe Putin, wannabe Kim Jong-un, Mohammed bin Salman, Erdogan, he wants to be all of that and more. But, as we come down to the final, question, as the hour has, now come almost to an end. It goes by really fast. My final question to you, Harry, with all of this information, how close do you think that we are to finally nailing Trump on these charges? Any of these charges. And most importantly, if a criminal referral is made to the DOJ on Trump, do you think that Merrick Garland has the balls and to ultimately step up and make the charge? How does the calculus change for him, if at all? Especially if the GOP retakes the majority and shuts down the January 6th committee right after the midterm elections?
All right, let me try to speak to all of it in the minute we have left. You're not going to like all I have to say, but balls, does he have the balls? No doubt. Yes, and again, yes, and I've seen it. How close are we? Far. Because maybe...
Wait, hold on. Did you just say that you've seen it? Or that you believe?
Well, I didn't mean in the locker room, but yes, okay. I've seen. He's got the balls for sure. He will do it if he thinks it's right. How far? A while. They are going, I think, in this methodical way. There are arguments, good arguments. Schiff and other very respectable people say under all these exigent circumstances we should be leapfrogging right now. Garland isn't doing that, but does he have the balls? Yes. How close are we? Far. What's going to happen though? Again, I haven't said this hour, but I've said it before. Fulton County is still, that I think is the most serious possibility of a criminal charge happening soon. And that's a pretty mature charge and straightforward. They've got the tape, etc. So it could happen there. So let's see. Did I get all of it? Well, yeah.
No, you keep going. You have more time.
Well, there's one more question you asked. No, you asked. So yes, he has the fortitude.
What about if in fact that the House changes?
No. Here's the last point I wanted to make, and you won't like this, but when the referrals for contempt, the House is technically the victim there, and that matters, and that gives extra weight to the DOJ. Here, what they're saying is we've got great evidence, and the Department of Justice will say, fantastic, we'll evaluate that evidence, but they won't start with a thumb on the scale in the same way because the country's the victim or whatever, as opposed to the House in particular.
Well, but there's problems here in all of those answers. What are the problems? We have seen Trump time and time again skate past us. Let me just use myself as the example, because obviously I'm the most familiar with myself, and I'm speaking from reality, not somebody else's, but my own. Witness tampering and obstruction of justice before and after I had gone and testified, not just to the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence and the Senate Select Committee, and then the Senate Judiciary, and then, of course, the famous House Oversight Committee, where that one was live, where he sent in Matt Gaetz to interfere in my family life. Donald Trump tweeting about me and my family, all of which were lies, right? In order to prevent me from testifying. That's called obstruction of justice. If you did that to me, you'd be in Greens right now. Anybody else would be. Witness tampering, obstruction of justice. Let's then go to the Donald Trump playbook, right, which was the unconstitutional remand of me back to Otisville, violating my First Amendment constitutional right, not stated by me, but stated by Judge Alvin K. Hellerstein, to which we have now made a dozen requests to Michael Horowitz, the OIG at the Department of Justice, the Office of the Inspector General. We can't get a single document out of them. On top of that, they're now, because I brought a lawsuit because we want discovery, they're now moving, right? They're now moving in order to dismiss the complaint, claiming that they were all acting in the scope of their employment, therefore you can't sue them. And until that matter is resolved, that all discovery is halted. Now, who's the discovery of? Donald Trump, Bill Barr, Michael Carvajal, former head of the Bureau of Prisons. Then you have DOJ that we brought in there. This guy Patrick McFarland, Adam Pakula, Enid Phoebus there's like 8 different people. We want the discovery because every time we make a request for FOIA, we get denied. I asked for it. They said because of process and methodology, they can't give it to me. The press tried to get it. They say in order to protect Michael Cohen's privacy rights, we can't give you that information. They will do anything to avoid the responsibility. Why? Because you're going to find out that the President of the United States, that fucking scumbag with that disgusting human being that was the Attorney General, this complicit walrus, went ahead, decided to lure me down to 500 Pearl Street for the sole purpose of remanding me back to prison, and they didn't want me to go anywhere else. That way they'd have to try to find me and pick me up. You understand? And yet, this is the problem. So far, he's managed to escape everything. Taxes. We all know that he lied and cheated on the taxes. We know that his apartment is not 33,000 square feet worth $370 million, but rather it's 11,000 square feet. The idiot doesn't know how big his apartment is. Not only does he live there, he built the fucking place. Well, we can go on with his inflation and deflation of assets. If you went ahead and gave improper information to a bank for the purpose that he did, or to insurance carriers for preferential rates, and so on, you would, again, be wearing green. But he seems to be escaping everything. So I'm not sure that the Department of Justice, or as my next book called Department of Injustice, that details everything we're talking about, I'm not so sure that they're going to do anything. And that's what's making the country so divisive. If they would hold him to account and make them testify, make them provide, or go to prison, one or the other, I think you'd start to see better closure.
Okay, so and I'll just say I understand, especially given your personal experience with the man. I just say a couple things. First is you even in that account, Mike, I think have stated 2 distinct problems there, and they're both really serious. One is the accountability, and the other is knowledge and transparency of all that's happened. And it's a scandal that has to be dealt with on a separate plane to find out all that. 1, 2, I agree. Basically, it has to be facts and law, individual case, but the 45th president of the United States was a serial criminal. Third, I'll just say, and this is the beginning of our next appearance if you invite me back. You're right. I would be in Greens, but there are reasons that, that his likely guilt is the beginning and not the end of the inquiry, and, things that our institutions, including bad OLC opinions, a lot of things we could talk about, go into. But so I think, and I've said, it's really not a matter of proof. It's a matter of, all these other things that go into the calculation. Are you gonna, try to put a former president in pinstripes? And I think I'll just try to end with, I think, a fairly mild statement that maybe you would even be able to endorse, that, that's a complicated question.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And Harry, as always, of course, you're going to come back, and I want to thank you for, for your hour, for your time today.
My pleasure.
And I definitely, I look forward to speaking to you both on the podcast and outside. You've been a tremendous help to me, and I just want to thank you for coming on and for everything.
Thanks for inviting me.